guys, today I'm sharing how to make fluffy chocolate sponge cake step by step. I created the Genoise sponge cake tutorial recently and a lot of you requested the chocolate version of that, so here it is. In this video you'll learn what to be careful when you make chocolate one to keep it fluffy and delicious. So let's get started. So let's start from creating the cake liners with the parchment paper. You may know I love using them for cakes. You can do this as you whip eggs too. I created this video a while ago. I shared how to make cake liners for cake pans or tins with different shapes. This was actually my first few videos I ever posted on YouTube. So I sound and look so awkward, even though I'm still awkward. But check it out later if you are interested. Now let's make the sponge. Add 2 large eggs, add granulated sugar, and roughly mix. Prepare your hot water. Gently simmering is fine, but make sure it's not boiling so that you are not cooking eggs partially. Over mixing constantly, warm up your egg mixture. Once it is nice and warm, remove from the heat. By warming up eggs, it whips up way faster, so that's why we are doing it. Keep whipping with high speed. Meanwhile, I added oil and milk in the same bowl. I always use olive oil because I love it, but you can use regular canola oil or vegetable oil. Now combine cake flour and cocoa powder and sift together. I like to sift twice to really make sure there is no lumps and they contains more airs all around. I recommend to use high quality cocoa powder for the best result. Now the egg is whipped and it's very fluffy. Check by drawing a number like this. It is whipped enough when it flows like this slow and the number remains on the surface. Now let's lower the speed and mix until it gets very shiny, which means the size of bubbles got much smaller, which results in more silky texture. The texture is going to be rough with a lot of big bubbles, and smaller bubbles do not get killed as easily as big bubbles. So by doing this, the heat is going to be higher, which results in more fluffier sponge as well. Now immediately add sifted flours while the condition is the best and start mixing with the folding motion. Watch this video to master the move. I created a tutorial especially for this. I'm showing this folding part with no cut or editing so that you can see how much you actually have to mix. Make sure to clean up the side and the bottom as you go, and once you don't see any more flours, stop right there and add oil and milk and continue folding. You want to fold fast and not to overmix because it can kill too much air bubbles. When you make the plain version though, you need to fold even more, as you can see in this tutorial, but because it contains a good amount of cocoa powder, we need to mix less today. That is because cocoa powder contains oil and oil like to pop bubbles. So that is why we do not overmix. We do not want to mix too much, otherwise the sponge is not going to rise up so much and it is not going to be so fluffy. With one batch of this recipe, you can stop once the liquids are evenly blended, then immediately pour into the pan while the condition is the best. Almost always you'll see a small portion of butter that is not completely even in the end, so use a spatula or a toothpick to even it out. Toss like this to kill big air bubbles. As I said earlier, the big bubbles are more fragile than small bubbles, so they disappear first. And put it in a preheated oven right away. Be careful not to over-bake the sponge as it can get dried easily. When you touch the surface, it does not sink but bounce back very gently. It just still makes bubble sound slightly. Don't forget that the sponge gets cooked slightly more with the remaining heat after you take it out from oven. Toss like this to release some steams, which helps avoiding the sponge from sinking too much. Flip and take off the pan. I love using the cake liners because it comes off so easily and I could bake the sponge a few more times after this without washing the pan. I flipped it back this time and tossed some more, but you can leave it upside down as well. To cut the sponge easily, I recommend to wait until it completely cools down. Now I want to compare this with my second recipe with less cake flour and more cocoa powder. I personally do not recommend to add more than this amount of cocoa powder if you want fluffy texture. I did the exact same thing with the first recipe, including how much I whipped and folded. Compared to the first recipe, the height is slightly shorter because it contains more cocoa powder and the texture was slightly firmer, but it is a very minor difference. The color is definitely darker as you can see, and the chocolate flavor is stronger than the first one. Because it contains less flour, it was slightly more crumbly too. I recommend this recipe if you want more stronger chocolate flavor. Now let's compare them with my third recipe. I'm baking with more cake flour and the same amount of cocoa powder as the first one. So this experiment shows what will happen with more cake flour. Because it contains more cake flour, the batter gets heavier as you mix and the bubbles get killed easily. So it is a slight difference, but the height is shorter than the first recipe and higher than the second one, which contains more cocoa powder. It also gets baked the fastest out of 3, so that means the sponge gets baked faster with more cake flour. It is fluffy, but the chocolate flavor is more mild, and because it contains more cake flour, it is more bouncy, slightly firmer than I personally like. I could feel more glutens for sure. When I lined them up like this, the difference of the color and the height looked even more obvious. After it's cooled down completely, wrap tightly with layers of plastic wrap and put it in a Ziploc or plastic bag before you store it. The sponge gets more moist after you storing it in the fridge overnight, and chocolate flavor kind of spreads all the way and all the flavors come together. It's not like a major difference, but it's definitely noticeable. So if you have time, I recommend to bake it a little bit ahead. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching. Let me know if it was helpful for you. If you tried the recipe, I hope you can share the result with me. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe for more videos all about beautiful pastries from scratch. So keep baking and I'll see you in my next video. Bye bye.